Greetings, travelers. I'm your host, the C-Dot that knows a lot, Dr. Waluigi. Well, it's a new year, and that means new videos from all of us content creators, on whichever platform is willing to let us review anything at this point. But this year is a little special for me, as I will be turning 30 years old this year, and because of that, I want to talk about all of the movies, TV shows, video games, and everything else that are important to me, as well as certain movies that are celebrating their own 30th anniversary. Speaking of, today's video focuses on the story of a real-life hero whose actions and those of his fellow comrades that helped a small town in Alaska survive a terrible disease. This is my review of the animated classic, Balto. The film is loosely based on the story of Balto and the several sled dog teams that carried bottles of diphtheria antitoxin to the small town of Nome, Alaska. The movie was the brainchild of Alana Lesser, who was told about the story of the diphtherium run from her grandfather, and thought it would make a good animated feature. So she took the idea to Steven Spielberg, who, after much discussion and making some quick changes, put the movie into production with his animation studio, Amblimation. Sadly though, despite the movie having been given a large budget of $31 million, the movie was a box office bomb, making back only $11 million, with critics giving mixed reviews on the movie, claiming it had very weak animation and the writing was too sappy for a story that was based on the topic of a very serious event in history, which sadly made this the last movie that Amblimation ever made. However, the movie has since then gained a cult following and is one more and more people are checking out, raising it to an underrated 90s classic. While I know that my family never owned this movie, I remember renting this movie from our library a lot as a kid. It's one movie that I still watch for its amazing characters, story, and great writing, especially the secondary characters who are some of my favorites. Though I will admit that I wasn't familiar of the real story of Balto and all that the other sled dogs went through, I'd like to believe that this movie still carries on their legacy and the hope they brought to the small town. But I'll get more into that when we reach the positives and negatives. First, we have to know what the hell this movie is all about. The movie follows a grandmother telling her granddaughter about the story of Balto, a wolf dog that lived in the small town of Nome, Alaska in the 1920s, who was persecuted by both the townspeople and other dogs, including the leader and hero of the town dogs named Steel, as they saw him as a threat for being half wolf. However, when the town's children are hit with a severe case of diphtheria and the town's dog sled team carrying the antitoxin goes missing in a severe snowstorm, it's up to Balto and his friends to find them and bring the antitoxin back to the town before the children all die of diphtheria. Unsurprisingly, the cast is of high quality with many big names of the 90s like Kevin Bacon, Bridget Fonda, Jim Cummings, and Bob Hoskins, all of whom do great work in voicing these characters, especially two of the side characters who were both voiced by Phil Collins of all people. My favorite character is probably Steel, voiced by Jim Cummings, as he gives the character a very menacing voice like something he'd use in a more serious role, but is still goofy and funny enough for an animated movie like this. However, one interesting thing I discovered is that the cast we got weren't the first actors that were chosen for this movie. Yep, this movie had a completely different cast that included Brendan Fraser as the original voice of Steel, Jennifer Blanc as the voice of Balto's love interest Jenna, and Kevin Anderson as the voice of Balto. From what I can tell, these changes were either made because the actors didn't fit with the character, as well as Universal wanting a bigger star for the main lead, which made the role of Balto harder on Kevin Bacon as he had to re-record Kevin Anderson's lines in the way that the character was already animated. Just goes to show that voice actors have been going through a lot of bullshit before the AI bullshit. Yeah, seriously, Hollywood, go fuck yourself on trying to make AI your next big trend. One of the things that baffles me is how many people said that this movie's animation isn't as good as something from Disney when it came out. But honestly, I think this movie is of the same quality as a Disney movie, which isn't surprising considering that most of the team that worked on this movie would go on to work at DreamWorks. The movie looks so colorful for being set in Alaska, having a lot of bright yellows and greens mixed with purples, as well as having a lot of blue, white, and black contrasts, which is interesting to know that Spielberg was concerned about making the animation stand out, but his team was able to turn this movie into another great animated movie with a winter setting that still holds up. The writing is another one of the movie's strong points, as while this and the other two movies that were made by Amblimation weren't directed by Don Bluth, it has great suspenseful moments that are known by Don Bluth, including the dark moments that were in his other movies. Oh yeah, this movie showed us what happens if the antitoxin doesn't get to the town, with the local carpenter building coffins for children who will and probably did die. Hell, there's a deleted scene of Steele being killed off by falling into a coal shaft where he's buried alive. Isn't death fun, kids? If there is one thing I know a lot of people are going to point out as a negative from this movie, is that it's historically inaccurate. Balto was not a half-breed, Togo and his team were the dogs that went through the worst of the relay to get the medicine to Nome, and there were more than just kids who were hit with the diphtheria. However, I find that unless this movie is a documentary, being historically accurate isn't something that matters in movies like this. Not that I'm saying that you shouldn't make these kinds of stories accurate as possible to their source material, but I think the most important part to get across is the emotion of the events that come from the characters and the writing, which is what I got from watching this movie. Plus, I find that when movies like this are made, it does give you the chance to look up the true facts on your own, which is something that I've done with many movies that are based on true events. If there are any negatives in this movie besides the historical inaccuracies, they mostly boil down to nitpicks. The two big ones I think of are when Balto had a vision of seeing his mother after he falls off a cliff, as it feels very random and we wouldn't get an explanation of who this character was until the sequel. The only other problem I have with the movie is that Steele never gets punished for running out on the team and leaving them for dead. It just felt inconclusive and leaves you with a feeling like the writers forgot about what to do with him when he gets found out. I do wish that they kept his death scene, as that would have felt more satisfying, but that's just my opinion, and I know many parents would have complained if the death scene was kept in. Personally, I think that Balto was an underrated 90s gem that more people should check out for the amazing characters, writing, and especially the animation. I'm sad that this company never got to do more movies before going defunct, but I am happy that most of the animators went on to work at DreamWorks and continued their amazing work in all of the animated movies that have been made since then. Overall, I give Balto a 10 out of 10. While it's not the most well-represented movie of the story of the dogs that carried the antitoxin to Nome, I do think it has the heart and emotions of that story, and that's honestly what I look for in stories like this. Plus, they made a movie about Togo and his journey, so there's that movie for those who might want to see something closer to the original story. Though I've never seen it myself, so it could be another misrepresentation of the source material. Thanks for watching, I'm Dr. Waluigi, and remember, don't judge a book by its cover, cause you'll never know what's inside.